Telltale games have always been well known for their adaptations of different IPs into narrative adventures. Their episodic format and simple choice-driven gameplay always made their stories easy for everyone to be a part of and enjoy, without having to commit one's entire well-being for the sake of story, or become scared for the sake of thematic symbolism. No, not the legs. I prefer the chest! With a number of different games that span TV shows, cartoons, and other video games, there was always a fun tale to tell with all of their adapted properties, and one of my favorites that happens to be hitting the 10-year-old mark is The Wolf Among Us. The story is based on the Fable comic book series, in which a number of well-known fables and their fairy tale characters have been exiled from their fictional homelands and are forced to live in the real world, specifically New York, because... yes, kind of like the fantasy-connected world of Shrek, only it's more modern and less memes. Hey now! You play as none other than the Big Bad Wolf himself, or Bigby, as he's known by everyone. Being the sheriff of Fabletown, it's his job to keep everyone safe from the Mundies, or non-Fable individuals as they're called. Conversely, he may also need to keep some Fables in check if the safety of the town is at risk. The game's plot revolves around a murder that's happened with one of the Fables, and it's up to Bigby to, blow this case wide open. It is essentially a classic murder whodunit mystery, and to really nail this type of story down, you need a lot of intriguing characters with their own ulterior motives, which is exactly what this game nails. Each person in Fabletown has their own reasons for getting involved or getting out of events pertaining to the murder, putting Bigby to work as he tries to pin innocence or blame on each of the different characters he comes across. It's well executed, and the story excels at creating intrigue with each person's subplot to entice curiosity. And although the game has a linear path with the individuals you can converse with, it's a gripping story where everyone involved has an important role to play. It's not quite Obra Dinn or Golden Idol in terms of inferring the story through deduction, but it does have a larger emphasis on the narration and drama mystery. Without a doubt, the personalities and characters are the main attractions of the game, and each represented Fable is portrayed very well. They range from tough, gritty personalities like Bigby, Bluebeard, and Gren, to softer personalities like Snow White, Beauty, and TJ, along with everyone else who manages to find that in-between. A very good cast, and you can find everyone on the emotional spectrum who will try to aid or get on Bigby's case. What makes the cast extra special is the fact that each character has the interesting stigma of being based on their fairy tale story. While they act in a manner that's meant to be realistic to the world's setting, their past lives are also there to remind them of who they are. Using Bigby as an example, he comes from the past as the villainous Big Bad Wolf that nearly ate Little Red Riding Hood and the Three Little Pigs. In both the comics and the game, he is meant to be someone who is trying to atone for his past life and prove that his intentions are for the good of Fabletown. However, when the game does test his patience, it makes for a great narrative because you get to choose whether he reverts back to his bestial nature or that he's capable of being more human. This is true of the other characters as well, and their past lives, which often act as their motivational drive, governs their interesting and flawed traits. A defining characteristic of The Wolf Among Us, and what really gives the story of the Fables their uniqueness. Though if you've never heard of the classical Fable stories growing up, this game might just end up being a normal murder mystery for you with some character intrigue. Though the game does provide you some backstory if you need to be reminded of their original fairy tales, so at least it's got that going for you. It's an interesting piece of metafiction, especially when these fairy tale characters are more than just their original one-dimensional counterparts. As someone who played this game literally 10 years ago, thanks save file for reminding me how old I was,
Epridge Farm remembers.
I did have a few doubts as to whether coming back to this game would actually hold up for me, even though I already finished the story. Surprisingly, it was actually fun to do so again. I think what really made the second playthrough meaningful was seeing how my choices differed after 10 years. Sure, it was nice to try some of the paths I didn't take before, but I found it very intriguing how despite the fact that I wanted to commit to some of the choices that I made 10 years ago, I actually wanted to change some of them on this run. I will be talking about spoilers regarding choices, so please skip here if you need to avoid any. On my previous playthrough, there was one very vicious act that I distinctly remember doing to Gren, and that was to rip his arm off at the end of the first episode. The game sets him up to make you hate him very much so, and the violent big bad furry in me still really wanted to Edward Elric him. When I got to this scene again, I thought for sure I was gonna rip his arm off, but I actually hesitated this time. Even when I wanted to base my decisions on only knowing Gren in the first episode, and to pour all of my emotional reactions into this decision, I just couldn't do it this time. That's actually why I enjoy revisiting story-driven narratives that force you to make decisions, because of how much time can actually affect how you see them again. As much as I always view Bigby as a person who cares, but also someone you do not want to f*** with, I thought beating down Gren was the better way to prove Bigby's humane ways of doing things this time around. I enjoyed pondering over the moral decisions and how the person I am today affected that choice. I'm fairly certain that if I decide to play this game again years from now, my judgment and my decisions will definitely change. I will always give Woody a drink though. Here you go, buddy. Have a glass on me. Wait, that's not what I meant! Though the Telltale structure is not without its faults, and the writing does suffer from it on occasion. These include a couple of dialogue inconsistencies that happen after certain events, and the conversations feel tonally off. There's a scene where Bigby is forced to fight the Tweedledee brothers, and you can choose not to kill one of them. In the aftermath of that fight though, Snow White reprimands Bigby for using his wolf form and asks him not to use it again, even though he was on the verge of dying, Miss Snow. It would make more sense for the scene to play if Bigby actually committed to killing Tweedledum, which I believe also plays if you do, but it feels out of pocket in the case of Bigby sparing him. It could also just be how Snow is written that way, but given her choice of dialogue, I would say that it's a written scene that was meant to be played in either case of Tweedledum living or not. Regardless, I do think the scene felt extremely off, and Snow acted as if Bigby had actually killed someone in his hybrid wolf form. There's a couple of these that occur throughout the game, but none that felt as substantial as this one. Other than that, there's a few dialogue choices made by Bigby that feel a little off, but otherwise the conversations in the story feel natural for the most part. I've also often heard the stigma of Telltale games not really getting into the choices don't really matter description, and I do kind of agree on that part, but not entirely. Yes, I think the endings and character outcomes are often predetermined, but I think it's the moral choices and how we feel about committing to them that make it much more impactful. How you treat Toad and his son, for example, or how you may not care about Beauty and the Beast, puts a different view on Bigby's character, which I feel like is the bigger moral consequence. Overall though, the game has an amazing story, and that's definitely the most defining aspect about it. Gameplay-wise, The Wolf Among Us is very simple. You're picking dialogue choices to carry on the conversations, controlling Bigby to investigate an area, or performing QTE events and realize your gamer reactions are no longer what they used to be.
What's that you say, Wishman? I'm having a hard time trying to figure out...
Wait, I'm dead? The dialogue conversations are the Telltale standard, and you'll be basing your decisions on your moral compass and how fast you can pick them. It's not quite as extensive as some other narrative-driven games like Slay the Princess, where the responses are up the roof, but the often 4 choices that you get to make are more than appropriate that Bigby can respond naturally in a variety of different moods. I think because Bigby is a defined character, it's easier to narrow down the type of response he would give to everyone. The investigative portion is serviceable, and it plays like a game of I Spy as you look around areas to find clues and evidence. Not the most engaging if you need something a little more complex for gameplay, but not something you'd expect coming into a Telltale game. Bigby having monologues for when he picks up items does make it more engaging as he pieces it together, or just voicing his honest opinions.
You won't be needing this anymore.
Yeah, boy.
No real gripes on this segment of gameplay though, and I did find it a bit fun to play a bit of I Spy. The QuickTime events are either something you love or hate. On the one hand, it does make the action sequences a little more involved. On the other, it's QuickTime events and you gotta test how fast you can react. I thought they were fun, and the QTEs and Telltale games feel a lot more forgiving than some others that just pop out of nowhere. You also don't really die if you miss a couple in a few segments. Overall, not the most complex in terms of gameplay, but complexity isn't something you'd expect out of a Telltale game. In fact, it's kind of the appeal. Not being complicated means you can dive into the story without having to sweat it out for mechanical gameplay. Oh, but there was one very humorous technical glitch that I've never experienced before, and that was being given blank choices.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer? Every night, I can feel my leg.
For a 10-year-old game that runs smoothly on its older engine, the graphics are timeless for me. It's how the game effectively uses a mix of its model design, color palette, and really effective lighting to create the noir style aesthetic. There's some notable datedness that you can see in the smaller textures and some blockiness with a few others, but the overall graphical style never feels shunted. I'd like to describe it as being very comic book-like with how it uses color and its lines, but also being dark and gritty because of the way it handles its lighting. Characters have very distinct silhouettes and color usage, so each of them look unique. Background designs have also very good color gradients and lighting to set the scene for the characters as well. It may be a little exaggerated to say it looks very cinema-esque, but that's honestly how it looks to me. A very good blend of comic-inspired design with very cinematic qualities that showcase the unique noir presentation of the game. Reminds me a lot of noir crime films with lighting or color contrast, and I think The Wolf Among Us is the only game I've seen with this unique type of aesthetic. Grim Fandango, LA Noire, Killer 7, Shadow of Doubt are a few that I can think of with a similar vibe. Regardless, the art style of The Wolf Among Us is difficult to find in any other game. The music is awesome to listen to, and there's a few tracks that emphasize the dark murder mystery tone of the game. There's also the occasional action sequence that the game is good at complementing through its urgent music. By far, the voice acting is stellar, and every character is brimming with their own unique personality, with barely any faults in the way they carry their voices.
Look, no harm done. I'll give you a pass, but listen. If you can't afford to look human, you're going to the farm. It's as simple as that.
You can't send me up to live with those animals. You know what I mean?
I don't have time for this shit.
Your impatience is callow. You're needlessly cruel, but have some respect for our history and rules.
It says Bricklebit in an older elvish hand.
What's Bricklebit?
A magic word.
What's it do?
Makes animals shit gold.
A few spoken lines that feel a little forced or off in some scenes, but I would say that's a bit more to do with the way it was edited together or the way it was directed. It's a stellar cast, and every personality of every fable really shines through the voice actors. It's hard to find games that have had the same story focus as the ones made by Telltale. Of course, choice-driven narratives are not all that uncommon, and you can still find them in a lot of different genres. But there's something kind of special about how Telltale handles its narrative structure. It's that sense of dramatic storytelling with a cinematic presentation that always makes you feel a little more than just a passive observer. Of course, it lacks a lot of complexities in its gameplay, but the simplicity of it is what makes it such an easy-to-involve experience. Being able to jump into a story and not having to mechanically worry about other parts of the game is kind of the fun appeal of the Telltale formula, and The Wolf Among Us still feels like one of the best representations of that. A gritty, dark story with some very intriguing characters, it was still a fun adventure to go through again. Not to mention, The Wolf Among Us is actually one of the best modern adaptations of the comic book series, and a very good prequel one at that. It's also just a very good noir-style game, and there's only a handful of those that exist on the market, especially ones with very good drama. If you're considering jumping into the Fables franchise, or looking for a good noir mystery, The Wolf Among Us will not disappoint, even 10 years later. Plus, if the sequel finally gets confirmed, at least you'll have a good reason to visit or revisit the first. But that's gonna do it for today, guys. Thanks for sticking around. There will be more games to play and more videos coming soon, so please stay tuned if you'd like to see more. But for now, I shall see you all next time.